What happens when Hollywood royalty meets daytime television's most fearless hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with the View panel, expecting softball questions and sympathetic nods, only to face a barrage of hard-hitting inquiries that expose uncomfortable truths. This isn't your typical celebrity interview. This is a masterclass in journalistic integrity that left one former royal speechless, defensive, and ultimately storming off set in what can only be described as the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these season hosts refuse to back down from asking the questions everyone's been thinking. The atmosphere in the View studio was electric as Meghan Markle made her entrance, dressed impeccably in a cream-colored blazer, her signature megawatt smile firmly in place. The audience erupted in applause, but seasoned viewers could sense something different in the air. Joy Behar's usually warm demeanor carried an edge, while Whoopi Goldberg's penetrating gaze suggested this wouldn't be the typical celebrity love fest that had become all too common on daytime television. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that immediately put everyone on alert. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and we're going to have what I hope will be a very honest conversation." The emphasis on honest wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, least of all Meghan, whose smile flickered for just a moment before returning to its practiced perfection. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, her journalist instincts clearly activated. "Meghan, you've been very vocal about your experiences, your struggles, your truth. But there are some people who feel that your version of events doesn't always align with what others remember or what the evidence suggests. How do you respond to those who question the consistency of your narrative?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down. Meghan's composure remained intact, but there was a noticeable shift in her posture, a slight stiffening that didn't go unnoticed by the panel. "Well, Sarah, I think it's interesting that when a woman speaks her truth, especially a woman of color, there's immediately this assumption that she must be lying or exaggerating. I've been nothing but truthful about my experiences." Joy Behar wasn't having it. "But Meghan, truth isn't subjective. Either something happened or it didn't. Take your wedding, for example. You told Oprah that you had a private ceremony 3 days before the public one. Just you, Harry, and the Archbishop. But the Archbishop himself later clarified that what you had was a private exchange of vows, not a legal wedding ceremony. That's not a matter of perspective. That's a factual discrepancy." The studio fell silent. This wasn't the gentle probing that Meghan had clearly expected. The hosts weren't backing down, and the Duchess's carefully crafted media persona was about to face its biggest test, yet Meghan's laugh was forced, her media training kicking in as she attempted to deflect. "I think you're getting caught up in semantics, Joy. The important thing is that Harry and I wanted to have a private moment together before sharing our joy with the world." "Semantics?" Sunny Hostin interjected, her legal background evident in her precise delivery. "Meghan, as someone who worked as a paralegal before your acting career, you understand the difference between a legal ceremony and a symbolic gesture. When you tell the world you were married 3 days earlier, knowing that millions of people are listening, that's not semantics. That's misleading." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's team, visible in the periphery, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not going according to plan. The Duchess had walked into what she assumed would be a friendly platform to promote her latest ventures, but instead found herself facing a tribunal of women who had clearly done their homework and weren't afraid to use it. "I'm not sure I appreciate the accusatory tone," Meghan replied, her voice maintaining its calm, but her eyes betraying a flash of something harder. "I came here to have a conversation, not to be interrogated about past statements taken out of context." Whoopi leaned back in her chair, a move that anyone familiar with The View knew meant she was about to deliver a devastating blow. "Nobody's taking anything out of context, Meghan. We're simply asking you to explain the discrepancies between what you've said publicly and what other sources have confirmed. That's not interrogation. That's journalism." Speaking of journalism, Alyssa Farah Griffin jumped in, her political background evident in her strategic timing. "Let's talk about your relationship with the media. You've complained extensively about press intrusion and negative coverage. Yet you've also courted media attention through carefully orchestrated interviews, podcast appearances, and public statements. How do you reconcile wanting privacy while simultaneously maintaining such a public profile? Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I think there's a difference between controlling your own narrative and being subjected to lies and harassment by tabloid media. Every person has the right to tell their own story. Absolutely. Joy agreed with mock enthusiasm. But when your story keeps changing, people start to notice. Take your claims about not knowing anything about the royal family before meeting Harry. Yet there are photos of you outside Buckingham Palace as a teenager. You wrote about Princess Diana and Kate Middleton on your blog, and you had books about the royal family. Were you being truthful when you claimed ignorance? The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and Meghan was clearly unprepared for this level of scrutiny. Her media handlers had obviously briefed her for a different kind of interview, one filled with softball questions about her humanitarian work and future projects. Instead, she was facing a panel of women who refused to be charmed or intimidated. "I think you're conflating different things," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. Having a general awareness of public figures and understanding the complexities of joining an institution are completely different matters. Sarah wasn't buying it. "But Meghan, you specifically told Oprah that you didn't research Harry or the royal family, that you went in naively. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise." This pattern of claiming ignorance when it suits your narrative is exactly what people find troubling about your public statements. The Duchess's composure was beginning to crack. Gone was the serene, composed woman who had walked onto the set. In her place sat someone who was clearly uncomfortable with being challenged and used to having her carefully constructed narrative questioned by people who weren't afraid of her celebrity status or royal connections. "I'm starting to feel like this is more of an attack than an interview," Meghan said, her voice carrying a warning tone that the hosts completely ignored. Whoopi's response was swift and uncompromising. "This is what real journalism looks like, Meghan. We ask hard questions. We hold people accountable for their statements. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making public claims that affect other people's reputations." The studio audience, initially enthusiastic, had grown quiet, sensing the shift in energy. This wasn't the feel-good segment they had expected. This was something unprecedented, a group of experienced journalists refusing to be starstruck and demanding real answers to legitimate questions. As tension continued to build, it became clear that this confrontation was far from over, and Meghan Markle was about to face the most challenging interview of her public life. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough for Meghan's team, but when the cameras rolled again, the host showed no signs of backing down. If anything, they seemed energized by her defensive responses, like sharks who had tasted blood in the water. Joy Behar straightened in her chair, clearly ready to go for the jugular. "Let's talk about your Netflix documentary and the claims you made about paparazzi harassment," Joy began, her tone deceptively casual. "You showed dramatic footage of photographers supposedly stalking you, but it was later revealed that much of that footage was from completely different events. Harry's court appearance, a premiere you weren't even at. Why would you use misleading footage to support your narrative about being victimized?" Meghan's face flushed slightly, the first real crack in her composure. The footage was meant to illustrate the general experience of paparazzi harassment, not specific incidents. "That's not what you presented it as," Sunny Hostin fired back immediately. "You presented it as documentation of your actual experiences. That's not illustration, that's deception. And when you're asking the public to sympathize with your plight, using fake evidence is pretty problematic, don't you think?" The Duchess's laugh was sharp and bitter now, all pretense of warmth evaporating. "I find it fascinating that when I try to show the reality of what we've endured, somehow I'm the one being accused of deception. Meanwhile, the institution that failed to protect me continues to be painted as the victim." Whoopi wasn't impressed. "Nobody's painting anyone as a victim here, Meghan. We're talking about your credibility. When you use footage that isn't what you claim it is, when your stories don't match up with documented facts, people start to question everything you say. That's not unfair, that's logical." And speaking of the institution, Alyssa jumped in. With surgical precision, "Let's discuss your claims about being silenced and having your passport taken away. Yet during your time as a working royal, you made multiple international trips, spoke at events, gave interviews. How exactly were you silenced? Meghan's composure was deteriorating rapidly. You're oversimplifying a complex situation. The control was subtle but real. Subtle. Sarah laughed incredulously. You went on a $500,000 baby shower in New York with celebrity friends, complete with private jets and luxury accommodations. You had a multi-million-dollar wedding watched by billions. You launched your own clothing line. That doesn't sound like someone who was being controlled or silenced. The Duchess's eyes flashed dangerously. You have no idea what it was like to live in that environment, to have every move scrutinized, every decision questioned. But that's exactly what we're doing right now, Joy pointed out with devastating clarity, questioning your decisions and scrutinizing your statements. And look how you're reacting. If you can't handle it from us, how could you handle it from the British press? The studio audience was completely silent now, captivated by this unprecedented dismantling of a carefully constructed public persona. Meghan's media training was failing her spectacularly as the hosts systematically deconstructed her narrative piece by piece. Let's talk about your family, Sunny said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You've publicly estranged yourself from your father, cut off your half-siblings, and haven't spoken to your father since your wedding. Yet you expect the public to believe that the royal family's dysfunction was the problem. Don't you see a pattern here? Meghan's mask finally slipped completely. How dare you bring my family into this? You know nothing about my personal relationships. We know what you've told us, Whoopi responded coolly. You've made your family drama very public. Through interviews, court documents, and media statements. You can't selectively decide what's private after you've already made it public. And let's not forget, Alyssa added with calculated timing, your treatment of staff. Multiple reports of bullying, people leaving their positions, investigations. Launched. The palace doesn't usually investigate these things without cause. The Duchess stood up slightly in her chair, her voice rising. Those allegations were investigated and found to be without merit. Actually, Sarah corrected with journalistic precision. The investigation was completed, but the results were never made public. That's very different from being cleared of wrongdoing. Joy leaned forward, sensing weakness. And what about your claims of racial discrimination? You suggested that someone in the royal family made comments about Archie's skin color, but when pressed for details, you couldn't provide any specifics. That's a pretty serious accusation to make without evidence. I never said it was racial discrimination, Meghan snapped, her carefully modulated voice cracking. You absolutely implied it, Sunny shot back. Don't insult our intelligence, Meghan. You knew exactly what you were suggesting when you made those comments to Oprah. You wanted people to draw that conclusion without you having to prove it. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Meghan was visibly agitated now, her composure completely shattered. This wasn't the adoring platform she had expected. This was a reckoning, and she was losing badly. I think we need to take a step back here, Meghan said, trying to regain control. This feels more like a hostile interrogation than an interview. Whoopi's response was swift and brutal. This is what happens when you build a career on playing the victim while attacking other people's reputations. Eventually, someone's going to ask you to back up your claims with facts. We're not your PR team, Meghan. We're journalists. The final blow was about to be delivered, and everyone in the studio could sense it coming. Let's talk about what really bothers people about your story, Meghan, Joy said, her voice carrying the weight of finality. You married into the most privileged family in the world, lived in palaces, had access to unlimited resources, wore jewelry worth millions, and traveled the globe. Yet your narrative is entirely focused on how you were wronged. Meanwhile, Harry lost his relationship with his family, his military honors, his country, and his lifelong friends. What exactly did you sacrifice? The question hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face went completely white, then flushed red with anger. How dare you suggest that I didn't sacrifice anything? I gave up my career, my independence, my privacy. Your acting career was already stalling, Sarah interjected ruthlessly. Suits was ending, you weren't getting major film roles, and your lifestyle blog was barely profitable. Marrying Harry wasn't a sacrifice. It was the opportunity of a lifetime that you've spent years complaining about. Sunny wasn't finished. And let's be honest about your so-called independence. You've made more money trading on your royal title in 3 years than you made in your entire acting career. Your Netflix deal, your Spotify contract, your book deals. They all happened because you're a duchess, not because of your talent. Meghan shot to her feet, her voice shaking with rage. You have no right to diminish my achievements or question my motivations. Sit down, Whoopi commanded with such authority that it seemed to echo through the studio. We're not finished. You came on this show to promote yourself and your projects, using your platform to continue painting yourself as a victim while destroying other people's reputations. Well, now it's time for some accountability. Reluctantly, Meghan sat back, down, but her whole body was rigid with fury. Alyssa delivered the next devastating blow. You want to talk about racial discrimination? Let's discuss how you've weaponized your biracial identity when it serves you while ignoring it when it doesn't. You never publicly identified as biracial during your acting career. That only became central to your narrative when you needed it to explain away criticism of your behavior. That is absolutely disgusting, Meghan spat, abandoning all pretense of composure. How dare you question my racial identity? We're not questioning your identity, Joy fired back. We're questioning your selective use of it as a shield against legitimate criticism. Every time someone points out inconsistencies in your story, you cry racism. That's not fighting discrimination. That's manipulation. The studio was electric with tension. Even the camera operators seemed transfixed by the unprecedented destruction of celebrity mythology playing out before their eyes. Sarah leaned in for what would prove to be the final assault. Here's what really happened, Meghan. You thought you could join the royal family and change it to suit your needs. When you realized that wasn't possible, instead of accepting that maybe you weren't suited for that life, you decided to burn it all down on your way out. You've spent 3 years systematically destroying Harry's relationships with his family while painting yourself as the victim. That's not standing up for yourself. That's emotional manipulation. Meghan's voice was now a mixture of rage and desperation. You don't know what you're talking about. None of you understand what I've been through. What you've been through. Whoopi's voice rose to match Meghan's intensity. You've been through a fairy tale wedding, a life of luxury, global fame, and unlimited opportunities. The only thing you've really been through is having to follow rules you didn't like and getting criticized for your behavior. Welcome to adult life, Meghan. The Duchess was now visibly shaking, her carefully constructed persona completely demolished. This is character assassination. No, Sunny replied with crushing finality. This is what happens when your character is actually examined. You've built your entire post-royal career on claims that don't hold up to scrutiny, and when that scrutiny finally comes, you can't handle it. Joy delivered what everyone could sense would be the knockout punch. The truth is, Meghan, you're not a victim of the royal family, the media, or racial discrimination. You're a victim of your own choices and your inability to accept responsibility for them. You had everything most people could only dream of, and you threw it away because you couldn't stand not being the center of attention. That was it. The final straw. Meghan exploded from her chair like a coiled spring finally released. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. You're all just bitter women tearing down someone more successful than you. The audience gasped audibly. Several people could be heard muttering in shock at the Duchess's complete meltdown. Whoopi remained perfectly calm, her voice deadly quiet. And there it is, folks. When someone who claims to be about kindness and compassion gets challenged, their true character emerges. Thank you for showing America who you really are, Meghan. I'm done with this. Meghan shrieked, ripping off her lapel microphone with such force that it clattered to the floor. You people are disgusting. Harry was right about the media. You're all vultures. She began storming toward the exit, her designer heels clicking furiously against the studio floor. But Joy wasn't finished. Running away when things get tough. Joy called after her. That seems to be your pattern, doesn't it? First your family, then the royal family, now us. Always someone else's fault, never yours. Meghan whirled around, her face contorted with rage. You know nothing about my life or my struggles. Nothing. We know what you've told us, Sarah shouted back. And it doesn't add up. That's the problem. The Duchess grabbed her purse and coat from her chair, nearly knocking over a production assistant in her haste to escape. This interview is over. And you can forget about me ever coming back to this pathetic show. Trust me, Whoopi called out as Meghan reached the studio exit. After this performance, You won't be invited back anyway. The studio doors slammed with such force that the sound reverberated through the entire space. For a moment, complete silence fell over the studio, as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Then Whoopi turned to the camera with a slight smile. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we just got our answer about how someone handles pressure and criticism. When you build your reputation on victimhood and someone finally challenges that narrative, this is what happens. Joy was still catching her breath from the intensity of the confrontation. I've been doing this for decades, and I've never seen anything quite like that. The complete inability to handle legitimate questions about public statements she's made herself. Sarah nodded, her journalistic instincts still firing. What struck me most was how quickly she abandoned any pretense of the composed, compassionate persona she tries to project. The mask didn't just slip, it was ripped off entirely. Sunny was already analyzing the legal implications. And the personal attacks when she couldn't defend her positions? Calling us bitter women? That tells you everything you need to know about how she really views people who don't automatically support her narrative. Alyssa looked directly into the camera. I think America just got to see the real Meghan Markle, not the carefully curated public image, but who she actually is when challenged. And frankly, it wasn't pretty. Whoopi wrapped up with characteristic directness. Look, we're journalists. We ask hard questions. We hold people accountable for their public statements. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place. This isn't about being mean or unfair. This is about truth and accountability. As the credits began to roll, the audience sat in stunned silence, still processing the most explosive interview in daytime television history. The View had done what no other media outlet had been willing to do. They had refused to be charmed, intimidated, or manipulated by celebrity status and had demanded real answers to legitimate questions. The result was the complete and utter destruction of one of the most carefully crafted public personas in recent memory, exposed not through gossip or speculation, but through the simple act of asking someone to explain their own words and actions that in the end, Meghan Markle had been banned from The View not by the producers or the network, but by her own inability to handle the truth about herself when it was finally presented without filter or favoritism.